We'll now move on to item number 2. If I know what I did with my script. It's report from the, or item 3, excuse me, report from the Community Review Board on police practices regarding a report on Community Review Board for police practices. All right. We have our Executive Director, Charmaine Mosley, and our CRB Chairman, Doug Case. Welcome, and I apologize.
I'm the Community Outreach Chair, Tara Gentry.
Perfect. Thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chairman Kate, members of the committee and staff. Thank you for having us here. The last time we appeared here was last year in April, so we have a lot to report on. It's going to be an update on the process improvements as well as the work plan for fiscal year 2018. We're just going to highlight the work plan and make it shorter, as well as case statistics for July of last year up until March of this year. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go through some of these initial slides fairly quickly for the sake of time, but I realize that 3 of the 4 members of this committee are new to the committee, so I wanted to give some background. Civilian oversight of law enforcement is a trend that is increasing nationwide. Currently, there's around 150 different entities across the country. Many of them have come about as a result of specific incidents that happened in their communities or a series of trends regarding incidents. Basically, there's 3 different types of review models. One is an investigatory model where you have an independent agency separate from the police department or the law enforcement agency that does the investigation. The second is the review board, which is our model, where the investigation is done internally by internal affairs and then is reviewed by citizens afterwards. And then the third one is an auditor or ombudsman model that instead of looking at specific cases, looks at data and trends and tries to see where there are needs for improvement. In San Diego, like many cities, ours came about as a result of a specific incident that happened in 1985. As a result of that incident, the city established a citizens advisory panel, which recommended that they develop an oversight board. And there were 2 measures that were put on the ballot in 1988. Proposition F utilized the investigatory model or independent investigation model. Proposition G would have implemented the review model. Both of them passed. Proposition G got 500 or more votes than Proposition F, and so that was the one that was implemented. As I'm sure you're aware, this past November, the citizens of San Diego approved ballot measure, coincidentally G, which did a couple of things. It changed the name of the board from Citizens Review Board Police Practices to Community Review Board. The initial review board was under the auspices of the city manager, and this changed it to be a joint responsibility of the mayor and the city council. And then it codified in the charter our responsibility to not only look at citizen complaints, but also look at officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths. And then very recently, the City Council, again, as you well know, established the Citizens Advisory Board on Police Community Relations. And their role is very different than ours. Ours is somewhat reactive. We're looking at cases that have happened and to see whether or not complaints have been handled appropriately, whereas the Citizens Advisory Board, which had their first meeting this past Monday, is more proactive. They're looking at ways to improve police community relations, crime prevention, and improve our community-oriented policing. The purpose of the board is, to put it simply, is to make sure that complaints against the police department are handled thoroughly, completely, and fairly. We often say that we're not advocates for the police, we're not advocates for the complainants, we're advocates for the process. In addition to, I guess an important thing about our review model is that an internal affairs case is not completed until the CRB has looked at it, and that's very important because during the review of the case, oftentimes there are changes that are made to the case based on our review. Another responsibility we have under the charter is to review discipline, and There it's a little bit different because we don't have the authority to impact discipline. And so it's after a case has been closed and the command has imposed discipline that it comes back to us, and our role is to see whether or not we believe that the discipline imposed was within the discipline matrix established by the police department. And oftentimes within that matrix there's a wide spectrum of options, and we indicate whether or not we think that they selected an appropriate option. The review board looks at the cases that are investigated by internal affairs, and those involve category 1 complaints. The more serious complaints, those include improper arrests, use of force, slurred discrimination, and criminal conduct. Additionally, if a category 1 complaint includes category 2 allegations, that also is investigated. Category 2 allegations include service, courtesy, procedure, and conduct. And most recently, our board has taken on the responsibility of auditing category 2 complaints. So previously there was really no civilian review of any sort of category 2 complaints. And so we've established a process where we look at completed cases and look at it not from a comprehensive review, but looking at them to make sure that we believe they're also handled appropriately. Because in our mind, there are some serious cases that are category 2, including search and seizure and unlawful detention and so forth. And we also have the ability to make recommendations to the police department, oftentimes arising from the cases that we reviewed. So we may review a case, for example, and see that the police officer acted within policy, but we believe the policy itself needs to be changed, or a new policy needs to be implemented and so forth. And so we have a policy committee. That committee makes recommendations to the chief, and many of our recommendations have been implemented by the department. In terms of the board itself, our bylaws state that our board is made up of 23 members who are appointed by the mayor, and currently serve 1-year terms with a maximum of 8 years. We do have several vacancies on the board. Our board is a time-intensive board. The average person spends 25 to 40 hours per month of volunteer time reviewing cases, doing training, doing committee work. And currently we're not able to fill those vacancies because we have not implemented, we have not established an ordinance to implement the Measure G. And so the process by which new members are going to be appointed in the future, whether they're going to be appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council what that process is going to be and so forth, hasn't been established yet, and so we're kind of in a holding pattern. And so we have 10 individuals that we've interviewed and gone through the background check, waiting to be appointed, but we can't appoint them. We do have a diverse cross-section of San Diegans, but it's also an area where we need improvement. We do have representation from 8 of the 9 council districts. I'm sure you're going to ask which one isn't represented, so I'll tell you it's District 4. But we do have a need for additional Latino members. We have 2 Hispanics. One of them is of Mexican heritage, the other is of Cuban heritage, and that doesn't reflect the diversity of the city. And our only API member just recently resigned from the board. So we definitely could use the help of city council members to identify people from your districts, especially people of diverse backgrounds. We also have a process where we have up to 23 prospective members who basically serve as trainees, and so it's a fairly intensive training process, and so as vacancies occur, then we're able to immediately put somebody into that position. Let's go on. Some of the accomplishments in the past fiscal year, starting on July the 1st, thanks to the city council approved funding of $25,000 for outside legal counsel. I guess that's the good news. The bad news is that it's taken a while to implement that. The new city attorney has been very helpful to us. An RFP is going through the process. Right now it's in Human Relations. The Deputy City Attorneys Association has some concerns and questions. Hopefully that'll be resolved soon so we can begin to implement that, begin to use that money. It would not replace the Deputy City Attorney that advises us. It basically would be on an as-needed basis. As I already mentioned, we're waiting for the implementation of Measure G, so we can proceed with two things. The number one is the appointments. Number two is the approval of policies and procedures that affect us. And for example, one of those, we have several bylaw proposals that were approved before the ordinance passed, but they weren't approved yet by the mayor, and so now we're waiting on the mayor and city council. One of those would change the terms to 2 years instead of 1 year, and so that's also, again, in a holding pattern. Several improvements are made to our website, including the ability to submit complaints online. We've greatly enhanced our prospective member training, including a community component to that. We've had a planning retreat. As I mentioned, part of our responsibility is to make policy recommendations to the board. Two recommendations that we made just within the past month. One was a recommendation regarding body-worn cameras and when they should be turned on. It actually was a refinement to a policy that the police department implemented at our recommendation previously, stating that officers should turn on their camera prior to arriving at a scene where there's likely to be enforcement action. We'd like to see the word should change to shall or would or must, understanding that there are exceptions for safety and practical reasons. And the second one that deals with canine investigations, which are not done by IA, but they're done because of the special nature of them by the canine unit, to make sure that those that come to us for review after they've been reviewed by internal affairs. We recently got caught up on our annual reports. For many years we had a part-time executive director, and now we have a full-time executive director. We've backfilled those annual reports, and they're now up to date. We also need to get our bylaws approved and also amend our bylaws once we know what the process is going to be for involving the city council in our oversight. We've increased our community outreach quite a bit, and Tar Gentry, who is our outreach chair, has been doing a tremendous job of going out into the community and making our board better known. One of the things we recently did was a community engagement bus tour, which is actually something that the police department does for their new officers. They spend a day on a MTS bus, and they go visiting different community organizations and talking to representatives from those organizations and community members. We basically did the very same tour for our own members and found it to be very enlightening, and we hope to continue that. We've worked to get more members of the public to attend our open meetings, which are held throughout the city, usually in public libraries. We've been making presentations, many of those have been made by Tara, to community groups. We also have begun making our presentations to the new officers after they complete their academy training, because we learned that a lot of officers didn't know who we were and kind of were afraid of us, and so we explained exactly what we do. We just did one 2 days ago, and that's been very successful. And we also have tried to improve our educational opportunities, thanks to the police department. As you may know, last November, when it was, in the last fall, the International Chiefs of Police conference was held here in San Diego, and they allowed us the opportunity of being able to go and attend the educational sessions there. Things we're working on for the upcoming year is to work on the flexibility with regard to case review. The police department has been very accommodating, because all of our review has to be done down in internal affairs, and that could be a constraint for persons who work full-time. They've been very accommodating to us to be able to go in after hours and on weekends to do our work. We're working on ways to improve the complaint process, including better tracking of the complaints. We are working with the police department to explore the idea of getting the police department policies and procedures available online. The next one here I've already mentioned, and that is try to continue to recruit people from all council districts, and again, we'd like your assistance in that. We've developed a comprehensive communications plan to make the public more aware of what we do. We hope to continue some of the community outreach and community education opportunities we've begun. We hope to collaborate with the new Citizens Advisory Board, as well as the Commission on Gang Prevention and Intervention, to make sure that we're working collaboratively, especially on policy recommendations and so forth. So there may be some policy issues that we see from our work that we think ought to be referred to the Citizens Advisory Board for them to explore in a little bit more depth. We would like to arrange for additional training on how to go about doing a thorough review of cases. We'd like to see what we're allowed to do legally with regard to giving information to complainants, because right now they just simply get a letter saying this is what the finding was, whether it was sustained or not sustained or exonerated, but we can't tell them anything beyond that, and sometimes it's confusing to them as to why, what the rationale was for that particular finding. And then we are going to be we need to develop the procedures for how to go about utilizing the as-needed outside counsel. We're going to formalize the Category 2 audit process. We did our first test run, if you will, of a case, and so now we're going to develop procedures for how to go about doing that so that it doesn't take too much of our time, but still allows us to have the ability to take a look at Category 2 complaints. We spent quite a bit of time in the past year finalizing our case review policies and procedures as kind of a manual, and then finally we hope to improve and extend our outreach, including outreach to youth. And so with that, I'll turn it over to our Executive Director for some of the statistical information.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I start the case statistics and going over that, I wanted to acknowledge our administrative staff. We have a new admin aide, Sonia Mack, and I want to thank the council as well as the mayor for allowing us to, to be able to have this new person in our office, as well as Denise Sandoval. They are really the backbone of the CRB, providing all of the administrative support and providing us with help and setup of the rooms and locations. So Denise is back here. Sonia's back here. We also have members of the CRB here with us as well, so I wanted to acknowledge them as well and thank them for all of the hard work that they do. From July of last year up until March of this year, the CRB reviewed 43 cases. And those cases were either received at the CRB office or issued to the CRB after Internal Affairs completed its investigation. This is a decrease in the number of cases reviewed by the CRB, by the board. Last year, they had up 67 cases, and that's a difference of 24 cases. The next slide is complaint incident locations. When looking at where the incident occurred in the 43 cases, a majority of the incidents occurred in the Central Division areas and the Western Division areas. Central shows 12 cases, Western shows 10 cases as well. The next largest number of cases occurred in the Northeastern, 6. The CRB did not receive any complaints to review from the Northwestern Division area. So before going on to the next slide, it's important that I explain the CRB process so that you will be able to understand the next slide. After IA investigates and renders its findings on a complaint, the complaint is assigned to a 3-member CRB team. The entire IA investigative file related to the complaint is made available to the CRB team members. The team then prepares recommendations to the entire CRB to either agree or disagree with the IA findings. At least 2 of the 3 members of the team must review the complaint file before a recommendation is made to the CRB. The team will recommend that the CRB on each complaint allegation agree with the Internal Affairs findings, agree with Internal Affairs findings with comment, disagree with Internal Affairs findings with comment, or refer to the CRB Policy Committee. In closed session meetings, the CRB will come to one of these conclusions. The CRB may agree with Internal Affairs findings, but comment that the incident could have been handled differently. The CRB may disagree with Internal Affairs and comment on the differing conclusion, or the CRB may simply agree with Internal Affairs. The CRB may, however, request an additional investigation be conducted to resolve any unanswered questions. When a complaint against an officer has been sustained, the police department imposes discipline. Internal Affairs reports the discipline to the CRB team. The CRB team reviews the disciplinary action taken against the officer and decides whether it agrees or disagrees that the reported discipline is consistent with the SDPD's discipline matrix. The team also agrees or disagrees that the discipline imposed was appropriate. There are several There are several findings that can be made by the internal affairs investigation. Those findings are sustained, not sustained, exonerated, unfounded, and other findings. So now I'm going to go on to the next slide. This is a slide of the categorization of allegations and findings. It represents the different allegations made in the 43 cases reviewed by the CRB. Each case contained a number of allegations totaling 116. The chart shows that Internal Affairs investigated and sustained 13 allegations in the conduct, procedure, and other findings categories. A majority of those findings were procedural. Procedural allegations that result in sustained findings are not always allegations that are made from a citizen that is filing a complaint, but can be findings that IA may discover when they are working on cases against the officer. These types of allegations can occur when an officer may not have filed the correct paperwork, or when an officer did not complete his or her duties in the correct manner after an encounter. 68 of the 116 allegations were exonerated by Internal Affairs, 33 of the allegations were unfounded, and 2 were not sustained. We are seeing a lower number of not sustained findings due to the body-worn camera videos. The next slide is the comparison of Internal Affairs and CRB findings. This slide shows a comparison of findings made by Internal Affairs and the CRB. Since the 43 cases contain multiple allegations of misconduct, the number of findings made is not equal to the number of cases in which Internal Affairs rendered findings. The 43 cases contain a total of 116 allegations of misconduct or procedural mishaps. The CRB agreed with Internal Affairs findings in mostly all allegations except for one allegation of courtesy misconduct, which was unfounded by Internal Affairs. That one allegation produced a disagree with comment by the CRB. The CRB agreed with comment for Internal Affairs findings of unfounded for 2 procedure allegations. The CRB agreed with comment for Internal Affairs finding of exonerated for 1 procedure allegation. The CRB agreed with comment for Internal Affairs finding of exonerated for an arrest allegation. There was an other finding that was sustained where the CRB also agreed with comment. So that shows what I just mentioned, explains why there's no equality in when you compare IA's findings with the board's findings in this slide. The next slide focuses on the timeline for completion of cases. The CRB takes all of the cases that they review seriously. They work diligently in reviewing cases and preparing those cases for deliberation by the entire board. With the introduction of body-worn camera video to its caseload, in addition to time spent in reviewing officer-involved shooting cases, we are noticing that it's taking the board longer to review its cases. A little more than half of the cases are taking 120 days or more to review. And that's what this slide is showing. The next slide is the officer-involved shooting cases that are reviewed by the board. There were a total of 10 officer-involved shooting cases reviewed by the CRB. That number is expected to rise as the teams are currently reviewing 5 more officer-involved shooting cases. Most of these cases are from previous fiscal years. The next slide shows the locations of where these officer-involved shootings took place. 2 occurred in the Western, Eastern, and Central Division areas. One each occurred in Mid-City, Northwestern, Northeastern, and Southern. Southern and Northern each had 0. So after the review and deliberation of these cases, the CRB determined that the shootings occurred within SDPD policy. One of the cases was within policy and with comment. The next slide shows the in-custody death cases reviewed by the CRB. This shows the number of cases, which is 3, that were reviewed by the CRB from last fiscal year, from July 16 till March of 2017. The incidents in these cases also occurred in previous fiscal years. The CRB deliberated and agreed that the actions of the officers were within policy. Body-worn camera case data. In January of 2015, the CRB began tracking its cases to provide the public with BWC data, body-worn camera data. So from July of last year up until March of this year, of the 43 cases reviewed by the CRB, in 33 of those cases, the officer turned on his or her body-worn camera. In one of the 43 cases, the officer turned on his body-worn camera, but the video was deleted due to the retention schedule. In 2 of the 43 cases, no body-worn camera were issued because the officer was a detective investigator or the camera was not issued yet. In 7 of the 43 cases, the camera was not turned on, but the CRB was able to view other video footage in 3 of those cases. The CRB has seen an increase in the number of cases that had video footage from body-worn cameras worn by the officers since the issuance of the body-worn camera. The CRB feels strongly that these videos are helpful in the CRB reaching decisions on these cases. The next slide is demographics, and I focused, because of time, on the race, ethnicity of the complainant, and then the next slide is going to be the race, ethnicity of the officer. When we released the fiscal year 2017 report in July or August of this year, there's going to be, it's going to be comprehensive, so we'll have more data available. The 43 cases reviewed by the CRB contain demographics of 44 complainants. More of this information will be included in the annual report that will be forthcoming. And 23 of the complainants were Caucasian, 14 were African American, 5 was Hispanic, 1 did not fill it out, and 1 Asian. The race ethnicity of the subject officer. Historically, officers who are subjects of complaints reflect the racial, ethnic, gender makeup of the police department in which they work. In the 43 cases reviewed by the CRB, 94 officers were subject of these cases. Of the 94 officers that received complaints against them, 66 were Caucasian, 18 were Hispanic, 4 were African American, 2 were Filipino, and 1 were Asian. 1 was Asian. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
If I can make a clarifying comment on one of the slides, the one where we talk about the frequency with which the CRB disagrees with internal affairs. Of the 43 cases to date this year's fiscal year, there was only 1 disagreement. I think it's important to note that those are disagreements at the board level, and most of our disagreements are resolved at the team level. So each case is reviewed by a 3-person team. If we disagree, we have a discussion with the internal affairs investigator or the sergeant or even higher to try to resolve that disagreement. Sometimes we get them to change their findings. Sometimes we get them to add findings. Sometimes they convince us, that their finding is proper. And so I don't want to give a misimpression that we very seldom disagree. We often disagree. We have some robust discussions with internal affairs, but usually by the time that it comes to a vote at the board, it's been resolved.
Perfect. Thank you for
Thank you.
the clarification, and thank you for the presentation. Welcome to the new members of the team. And we'll go to members of the public. Our speaker on this item is Evie Kossauer. And you will have 3 minutes, ma'am.
Hello. I've been working with Women Occupy with this committee and with the full City Council for about 2 years on this issue, and we have spent some time sitting in. That's why I said hello to some of the members. They've gotten to know us, and actually we feel quite welcome there. I get announcements of when the meetings occur, and I really appreciate that. In fact, our group does. What we have found is that over that period, there have been some changes on the board itself, and of course, changes in this committee. You've been brought up to date pretty much by Doug Case, the chair. I will mention, though, that we did try to put legislation into the last election that asked for independent counsel and subpoena power, and they have gotten some funds for legal counsel, which is something else we think they ought to have. But Measure G came through by 2 members that are no longer on this committee or the city council, which at least put you in charge also, so we can come in and work with you and hope that we can get further legislation so they can be fully independent, such as the sheriff's group, review group is, and such as the ethics committee is, which is in the city. This group really needs to be independent. And though Doug says that they don't often have issues, I think I have heard from a number of the people and directly to me at one of the recent meetings that though they are not a rubber stamp, they would like to be independent. That this really would give them, at least most of them, I don't know who specifically does feel that or not, but I know that there are some that do. So I'm here to just remind you of that, and that we will probably be seeing and talking with you, and we will be continuing to sit in on the meetings and keep up with what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, now, first off, any mayoral, IBA, city attorney comments? Nope. Perfect. Go to committee member comment, and Mr. Ward.
Thank you, and I just really briefly wanted to thank Doug Case, a good friend and chair. This is a lot of hard work that you and many of your colleagues put into this board work, and I know the amount of time that it takes to be able to review all the material and really think critically about the decisions that you're reaching. Certainly appreciated. I think it's a vital part to the transparency and accountability measures that we try to convey to our community members, that we were able to verify what we already know, that our police officers are by and large doing a fantastic job and just trying to follow policy to the letter of the law. So I really don't have any questions. I thought you gave a very thorough, thank you for a really thorough presentation. The update is really much appreciated. I recognize the work plan you have ahead of you in the next fiscal year, and certainly will commit to thinking, scratching my brain, trying to identify other people that are willing to work alongside of you, especially from communities across San Diego, which are not proportionally represented right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Vice Chair Bree.
I just want to second the comments that Councilmember Ward made. I really appreciate all that you do. What you do is very important in making sure that the community trusts our police department and that they know they have a place to go if something doesn't go as they think it should. So thank you. Since I'm new here, I want to ask, what do we need to do? What is the process for getting an ordinance written to implement Measure G? Do we know where that is? Maybe the
So, can I defer to the mayor's staff, or I
Yeah.
can try?
So the development of implementation language to implement Proposition G has been an ongoing process. Currently, that is being developed in our Neighborhood Services Department. We expect that process to near completion around June.
So I assume it would come to this committee after it's drafted for initial review before it goes to the full council? Is that the?
That would be correct, but I would defer to the city attorney's office for clarification.
That's correct. Typically ordinances would be presented to a committee before it goes to full council.
Great. Yeah, because as I understand from your comments, we can't fill vacancies on the board until we have this ordinance in place.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you again for the presentation and all of your hard work. And you mentioned in your comments in terms of the vacancies and filling a void, I guess on the API side, at least I know our nominee that we submitted is a member of the API community. So once the ordinance gets done, hopefully they'll be going through the process as well too. And so appreciates that. And well, I guess one question, and this has been a point of discussion in this committee for about a year now or so, and a lot of time has been spent on the outreach side, so I appreciate your work on the outreach. Are you seeing that reflected in members of the public who actually do attend these meetings?
We've seen an increase in public attendance at our meetings. The last 2 meetings, there was like at least 20 to 30 people there. We've also gone out with Tora Gentry, who's actually been spearheading the charge with outreach. So you know, it's slow, but it's getting there. We have at least, I believe, at least 8 to 9 people that are waiting to be interviewed. So that's the next step in our process. We can continue with the interviews and have them go through background and then just wait for everything else to get put in place.
Perfect. This is an information item, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate all of
Thank
your
you.
hard work, and thanks for the time. We'll move to our last item on the agenda, which is a report from the Commission on Gang Prevention and Intervention